The Art of Emotional Freedom Without Losing Your Heart. Part 1, Chapters 1 to 4. Here's what nobody tells you about feelings. The world has sold you a beautiful lie that caring intensely about everything, drowning in your emotions and staying hooked to every outcome makes you more alive, more human, more real. They've painted emotional detachment as this cold, heartless thing that turns you into stone. But let me tell you something that might shake everything you believe. What if I told you that your emotions have been running your life like a puppet master, and you didn't even notice the strings? What if the key to actually feeling more, loving deeper, and living fuller isn't about feeling everything harder, but about learning when to let go? Right now, as you're reading this, there's a good chance you're carrying emotional weight that isn't even yours. You're stressed about situations you can't control. You're replaying conversations from 3 days ago. You're anxious about tomorrow's possibilities. And here's the truth nobody wants to admit. This isn't living. This is emotional imprisonment, dressed up as sensitivity. But here's where it gets interesting. The most unshakable people you've ever met, the ones who move through life's storms like they have an internal compass nobody can touch. They haven't disconnected from their hearts. They've discovered something far more powerful. They've learned to feel everything while being controlled by nothing. And before this ends, you're going to learn exactly how they do it. So if you've ever made a decision while angry that you wish you could take back, if you've lost sleep over things completely beyond your reach, if you felt like your emotions are driving the car while you're screaming from the passenger seat, then what comes next will change everything. Because you're about to discover the difference between healthy emotional freedom and toxic emotional shutdown. You're going to learn how to stay warm, caring, and deeply connected while developing the kind of inner stability that external chaos can't disturb. But I need to warn you, once you see how much power you've been giving away to your emotional reactions, once you understand how to reclaim that power, there's no going back to the old way of living. So the question is, are you ready to become emotionally free while keeping your humanity intact? Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Invisible Cage of Emotional Reaction. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you responded to a situation instead of reacting to it? Think about it. There's a massive difference between these two, and most people spend their entire lives not knowing which one they're doing. Reacting is automatic. It's that instant surge when someone cuts you off in traffic. It's the defensive wall that shoots up when someone questions your choices. It's the anxiety spiral that starts the moment you see an unexpected message from your boss. Responding is different. Responding is choosing. It's pausing long enough to decide how you want to show up instead of letting your nervous system decide for you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Right now, in this very moment, your emotions are probably running your life, and you don't even realize it. You think you're making conscious choices, but you're actually being driven by invisible emotional patterns that were programmed into you years ago. Think about yesterday. How many decisions did you make based on how you felt rather than what actually made sense? Did you skip that workout because you felt tired, even though you knew you'd feel better after? Did you avoid that difficult conversation because it felt uncomfortable even though you knew it needed to happen? Did you scroll social media because you felt bored even though you had important work waiting? These aren't small things. These are the moments where your life is being shaped and emotions are holding the steering wheel. Here's what most people don't understand. Emotional reactivity isn't a personality trait. It's not who you are. It's a habit. And like any habit, it's been reinforced through repetition until it feels like your identity. You've told yourself stories like, I'm just a really sensitive person, or I can't help how I feel, or that's just how I am. But these stories are chains keeping you locked in patterns that don't serve you. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine there's someone, let's call her Maya, who wakes up every morning and immediately reaches for her phone. Before her eyes are fully open, she's scrolling through messages, emails, notifications. Someone posted something political that irritates her. There's a work email with a tone she doesn't like. A friend didn't respond to her message from yesterday. And just like that, before she's even gotten out of bed, her emotional state for the entire day has been determined by other people's words, actions, and digital presence. She goes to work carrying this mood. Her colleague makes an offhand comment about her project, and because she's already in a defensive state, she takes it personally. She snaps back. Now there's tension. She spends her lunch break replaying the interaction, getting angrier. By the time she gets home, she's exhausted, not from actual work, but from the emotional gymnastics she's been doing all day. This is emotional reactivity in action, and it's costing her everything: energy, relationships, peace, opportunities, clear thinking, the ability to actually enjoy her life. But here's what's even more insidious about this pattern. The more you react emotionally, the more your brain gets wired to react. Your nervous system becomes hypersensitive. Your threshold for triggers gets lower and lower. Things that wouldn't have bothered you 5 years ago now send you into spirals. You're not getting more sensitive. You're getting more conditioned to be reactive. Think about the last time you got really angry about something. Maybe it was a disagreement with your partner. Maybe it was a frustration at work. Maybe it was something someone said online. In that moment of anger, did you say things that aligned with who you want to be? Did you make decisions that served your long-term goals? Or did you say things you later regretted, make choices that created more problems, and waste energy on battles that didn't matter? The cost of emotional reactivity is enormous, but because it happens gradually, most people never add up the total. They never calculate how much time they've lost to worry, how many relationships they've damaged through defensive reactions, how many opportunities they've missed because fear made the decision, how much sleep they've lost replaying situations they can't change. And here's the kicker. Most people think this is normal. They look around and see everyone else doing the same thing, so they assume this is just what life is. They think inner peace is something you get after you fix all your problems, after everyone treats you right, after your circumstances align perfectly. They're waiting for external conditions to grant them internal stability. But that's backwards. External conditions will never be perfect. People will always do unexpected things. Life will always throw curveballs. If your inner peace depends on everything going your way, you'll never have it. This is where emotional detachment changes everything. And I'm not talking about becoming numb. I'm not talking about not caring. I'm talking about developing the ability to observe your emotions without being hijacked by them, to feel fully without being controlled completely, to care deeply without being destroyed when things don't go your way. Imagine if Maya learned to wake up and take 5 minutes before reaching for her phone, to set an intention for her day based on her values rather than other people's digital noise. When that colleague made that comment, imagine if she could pause, take a breath, and ask herself, is this actually about me, or is this about their stress? Imagine if she could respond with curiosity instead of defensiveness. Interesting point. Tell me more about your thinking. Same external circumstances, completely different internal experience. That's the power of emotional detachment. But here's what stops most people from developing this skill. They've been taught their entire lives that emotional intensity equals caring. That if you're not worried about something, you don't care about it. That love means suffering when the person you love is in pain. That passion requires emotional volatility. These are lies, powerful lies that keep people trapped in reactivity while calling it humanity. The truth is that emotional detachment actually increases your capacity to care effectively. When you're not drowning in emotional reactions, you can actually show up for people in meaningful ways. When you're not paralyzed by anxiety, you can take action on things that matter. When you're not controlled by fear, you can pursue goals that genuinely fulfill you. Every person you admire who seems unshakable has learned this. They haven't disconnected from life. They've disconnected from the tyranny of unexamined emotional reactions. They feel everything, but they choose what gets to drive their decisions. Chapter 2. The dangerous myth that detachment means heartless. Let's clear something up right now, because this confusion is what keeps most people stuck in emotional chaos while being terrified of the solution. When people hear emotional detachment, they immediately picture someone cold, robotic, uncaring. They imagine someone who's shut down completely, who doesn't feel anything, who's disconnected from relationships and experiences. They think of that person who seems almost sociopathic in their inability to connect. This is not what we're talking about. Not even close. In fact, that cold, shut-down person, they're not detached. They're dissociated. They're not managing their emotions. They're suppressing them. And there's a world of difference. Let me tell you about someone I'll call James. James grew up in a household where emotions were dangerous. Showing vulnerability got you mocked. Expressing needs got you ignored. Crying was weakness. So James learned to shut everything down. He built walls so thick that nothing could get in, but also nothing could get out. As an adult, James appears calm, unflappable. Nothing seems to bother him. But if you look closer, you'll notice he doesn't really connect with anyone. His relationships are surface level. He doesn't celebrate victories or grieve losses. He's not at peace. He's frozen. That's not detachment. That's emotional avoidance. That's what happens when someone is so afraid of their feelings that they disconnect from them entirely. Real emotional detachment looks completely different. It looks like someone who feels deeply, but isn't controlled by those feelings. Someone who can be disappointed without being devastated, excited without being manic, concerned without being consumed by anxiety. They're fully alive, fully engaged, but they have space between their emotions and their actions. Think about the calmest person you know. I bet they're not emotionless. I bet they laugh easily, they show care, they engage with life. But when crisis hits, they don't fall apart. When someone criticizes them, they don't crumble. When plans change unexpectedly, they adapt without drama. That's emotional maturity. That's healthy detachment. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Caring and attachment are not the same thing. You can care deeply about something without being attached to a specific outcome. You can love someone profoundly without needing to control their behavior. You can pursue goals passionately without your self-worth depending on achieving them. Caring means you value something, you invest in it, you show up for it. Attachment means your emotional well-being depends on getting exactly what you want. Let me give you an example. Imagine you have a friend going through a difficult time. They just lost their job. They're stressed, scared, uncertain about the future. An emotionally attached response looks like this. You absorb their anxiety. You start worrying about their situation as much as they are. You can't sleep because you're thinking about their problems. You feel responsible for fixing everything. You get frustrated when they don't take your advice. Their emotional state completely hijacks yours. An emotionally detached response looks like this. You listen fully without trying to immediately solve everything. You acknowledge their feelings without taking them on as your own. You offer support without taking ownership of their journey. You maintain your inner stability so you can actually be helpful instead of adding your anxiety to theirs. Which person is actually more caring? The one who drowns with their friend, or the one who stays solid enough to throw them a lifeline? This is what most people get backwards. They think emotional intensity equals depth of care, but often emotional intensity just means you're caught up in drama instead of being genuinely helpful. Real compassion requires some level of detachment. It requires the ability to be present with someone's pain without making it about you, to witness their struggle without needing to fix it immediately, to care about their well-being without controlling their choices. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine you're a doctor in an emergency room. Someone comes in with a serious injury. What's more helpful? A doctor who sees the injury and becomes so emotionally overwhelmed that they can't function. Or a doctor who genuinely cares about the patient but maintains enough emotional equilibrium to think clearly and take effective action. Obviously, you want the second doctor. Their detachment doesn't make them cold. It makes them competent. It allows them to care effectively instead of just caring intensely. This applies to every area of your life. When your child is upset, they don't need you to be upset with them. They need you to stay grounded so they can feel safe. When your partner is stressed, they don't need you to match their stress. They need you to be a calm presence that reminds them everything will be okay. When your workplace is chaotic, your team doesn't need another person panicking. They need someone who can think clearly and lead effectively. The fear that detachment equals coldness comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of emotions. We've been taught that Emotions are facts about reality rather than information from our nervous system. We've been conditioned to believe that intense feelings mean something important is happening. But feelings are not facts. Anxiety doesn't mean something bad is definitely going to happen. It means your brain has detected something it interprets as a potential threat. Anger doesn't mean someone has definitely wronged you. It means your brain perceives a violation of your expectations. Sadness doesn't mean your life is terrible. It means you're processing loss or disappointment. When you understand emotions as information rather than commands, you can develop a healthier relationship with them. You can appreciate what they're telling you without being controlled by them. You can acknowledge their presence without letting them dictate your behavior. This is what true emotional intelligence looks like. Not suppressing feelings, not denying them, but developing enough space between experiencing an emotion and acting on it that you can choose your response wisely. The people who seem coldest are usually the ones most afraid of their emotions. They've shut down because they don't know how else to manage the intensity. True emotional detachment actually requires tremendous emotional awareness and courage. You have to be willing to feel fully while simultaneously not being overwhelmed. This is an art, a skill, something you develop over time with practice. Chapter 3. How your brain keeps you trapped in reaction mode. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your brain when you lose control of your emotions. Because once you understand the mechanics, you gain power over the process. Deep in your brain, there's a small almond-shaped structure that's basically your internal alarm system. Scientists call it the amygdala, but you can think of it as your ancient survival mechanism. This part of your brain developed millions of years ago when your ancestors faced actual life or death threats every day. When your ancestor heard a rustling in the bushes, their alarm system would instantly flood their body with stress hormones, preparing them to either fight or run. This response was perfect for immediate physical dangers. It kept them alive. But here's the problem. Your modern alarm system can't tell the difference between a lion jumping out of the bushes and your boss sending you a critical email. It treats a difficult conversation with your partner the same way it treats an actual threat to your survival. It responds to the possibility of social rejection with the same intensity it would respond to physical danger. This is why you feel your heart racing when you have to give a presentation, why your stomach drops when someone doesn't text you back, why you can't sleep when you're worried about tomorrow's meeting. Your ancient alarm system is treating modern psychological challenges as survival emergencies. And every time this alarm goes off, it hijacks your rational thinking. Blood flow decreases to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, planning, and wise decision-making. Instead, all your resources get diverted to your reactive survival brain. This is why you say things when you're angry that you'd never say when you're calm. Why you make terrible decisions when you're anxious. Why you can't think clearly when you're overwhelmed. Your smart brain has literally gone offline and your reactive brain is running the show. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Every time you react emotionally to a situation, you're actually training your brain to react that way more easily in the future. Your brain creates neural pathways based on repeated patterns. Think of it like walking through a field of tall grass. The first time you walk a particular route, it's difficult. But walk that same path every day, and eventually you've created a clear trail. Your emotional reactions work the same way. React to stress with anxiety once, and you've started creating a pathway. React to stress with anxiety 100 times, and you've created a superhighway. Your brain will default to that pattern automatically because it's the path of least resistance. This is why some people seem to be naturally anxious, or naturally angry, or naturally defensive. They're not. They've just practiced those reactions so many times that their brain executes them automatically. The good news? Neuroplasticity works both ways. Just as you can train your brain to be reactive, you can train it to be detached. You can create new neural pathways that support calm, thoughtful responses instead of automatic emotional reactions. But this requires understanding how to work with your nervous system rather than against it. Your autonomic nervous system has two modes. There's your sympathetic nervous system, which activates your fight or flight response. And there's your parasympathetic nervous system, which activates your rest and calm response. Most emotionally reactive people live in a chronic state of sympathetic activation. Their nervous system is constantly looking for threats, constantly on alert, constantly ready to react. Learning to activate your parasympathetic nervous system is essential for emotional detachment. This means developing practices that signal safety to your nervous system. Deep breathing, progressive relaxation, time in nature, creative activities, positive social connections. When your nervous system feels safe, your alarm system calms down, and your rational brain comes back online. Here's something else that's crucial to understand. Your emotions are not telling you facts about reality. They're telling you about your nervous system's interpretation of reality. And that interpretation is based on your past experiences, your conditioning, your current stress level, and countless other factors. When you feel anxious about a presentation, that anxiety isn't telling you the presentation will definitely go badly. It's telling you your brain has associated presentations with threat based on past experiences. When you feel angry about someone's behavior, that anger isn't necessarily telling you they've wronged you. It's telling you your brain perceives their behavior as violating your expectations or boundaries. This distinction is liberating. When you stop treating emotions as facts and start treating them as information about your internal state, you gain tremendous freedom. You can appreciate the information they provide without being controlled by the intensity they create. Think about it this way. If you're driving and a warning light comes on in your car, you don't panic and swerve off the road. You notice the warning. You acknowledge that something needs attention, and you respond appropriately. Maybe you pull over and check it out. Maybe you make a mental note to address it soon. But you don't let the warning light control your steering wheel. Your emotions are warning lights. They're valuable information, but they shouldn't be driving the car. When you understand this, you can develop a completely different relationship with your emotional experiences. You can notice anxiety without assuming something terrible is about to happen. You can feel anger without assuming you need to attack. You can experience sadness without assuming your life is falling apart. This is what emotional detachment actually means. Not eliminating emotions, not suppressing them, but developing the neurological capacity to observe them without being consumed by them. Chapter 4. The 3 stages of emotional freedom. Not all emotional detachment looks the same. There are different levels, different depths, and understanding these levels is crucial because most people either don't go far enough and stay stuck in reactivity, or they go too far and disconnect from life entirely. Think of emotional freedom as a journey with distinct stages. Each stage has its own characteristics, challenges, and benefits. The goal is finding the level that serves your life while keeping you fully human. The first stage is what I call situational awareness. This is where most people should start, and for many, it's all they'll ever need. Situational awareness means developing the ability to step back from specific circumstances that typically trigger you. Instead of being immediately consumed by frustration, setbacks, or conflicts, you learn to create a pause, a breath, a moment of space between what happens and how you respond. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone criticizes your idea. Your default pattern might be to immediately get defensive. Your heart rate increases. Your jaw tightens. You start formulating arguments to prove them wrong. You take it personally. Situational awareness would look like this. You notice the criticism. You feel that initial surge of defensiveness. But instead of immediately reacting, you pause. You take a breath. You ask yourself, is there any merit to what they're saying? Or is this just my ego feeling threatened? You create enough space to choose a response instead of being forced into a reaction. This level of detachment doesn't require you to change your entire personality. It just asks you to develop the skill of pausing before reacting in challenging situations. When someone cuts you off in traffic, instead of raging, you notice your anger and let it pass. When you get disappointing news, instead of spiraling into despair, you acknowledge your disappointment and ask what you can learn. This is highly practical. It improves your relationships because you stop saying things you regret. It improves your decision-making because you're not choosing based on temporary emotions. It improves your stress levels because you're not constantly reacting to every little thing. Most people can achieve situational awareness with consistent practice. It just requires paying attention to your triggers, recognizing when you're becoming reactive, and implementing simple techniques to create space between stimulus and response. The second stage is outcome independence. This is more advanced, and it requires deeper work. Outcome independence means separating your emotional well-being from the results of your efforts. You care deeply about your goals. You work intensely toward them, but your inner peace doesn't depend on achieving them exactly as planned. This goes against everything we're taught. We're conditioned to tie our self-worth to our achievements. We feel good about ourselves when we succeed and terrible about ourselves when we fail. Our happiness becomes completely dependent on external circumstances aligning with our desires. Outcome independence flips this completely. Your sense of worth comes from your effort, your intention, your growth, not from specific results. You measure success by whether you showed up fully, whether you acted in alignment with your values, whether you learned something, not by whether you got exactly what you wanted. Let me tell you about someone I'll call David. David was building a business. He poured everything into it, worked 16-hour days, sacrificed relationships, health, peace of mind. His entire identity became wrapped up in making this business succeed. When it failed, David fell apart. Depression, anxiety, a complete crisis of identity. He couldn't separate his worth as a person from the failure of his business. His attachment to that specific outcome destroyed him when things didn't work out. Now imagine a different version of this story. David builds the business with the same passion and effort, but he's also practicing outcome independence. He's committed to the vision, but he's not attached to any single path to get there. When the business fails, he's disappointed, sure, but he's not destroyed. He can step back and ask, what did I learn? How did I grow? What's the next move? Same external circumstance, completely different internal experience. This level of detachment is particularly powerful in relationships, career, and creative work. When you're not desperately attached to someone loving you back, you become more attractive because you're not needy. When you're not frantically trying to get promoted, you can focus on excellent work instead of politics. When you're not obsessed with how your creative work will be received, you can focus on authentic expression. The paradox is that the less attached you are to outcomes, the more likely you are to achieve them. Attachment creates anxiety, and anxiety interferes with performance. Detachment keeps you focused on the process, which is what actually produces results. The third stage is existential perspective. This is the deepest level, and honestly, most people don't need to go here. This is for people who want to explore the furthest edges of emotional freedom. Existential perspective means stepping back from the entire drama of human existence and viewing life from a cosmic or spiritual viewpoint. People at this level often describe feeling like they're watching their life unfold rather than being completely identified with it. This can be profoundly peaceful. It can also create challenges in normal life. People at this level sometimes struggle to engage with everyday concerns that seem trivial from their expanded perspective. They might have difficulty maintaining motivation for conventional goals or relating to people who are caught up in what they perceive as meaningless dramas. This level often comes from intense spiritual practice, profound life experiences, or sometimes just deep philosophical contemplation. While it provides tremendous inner peace, it can also create disconnection from practical life. Requirements. For most people, stage 2, outcome independence, is the sweet spot. It provides emotional freedom and inner peace while maintaining engagement and motivation. It lets you play the game of life fully while remembering it's ultimately just a game. The key is understanding that these stages aren't necessarily permanent or rigid. You might be at different levels in different areas of your life. You might practice situational awareness at work while developing outcome independence in your personal relationships. You might experience moments of existential perspective during meditation while operating from situational awareness in your daily life. The progression isn't linear either. You might have glimpses of outcome independence during crisis, then return to working on situational awareness in your regular routine. What matters is knowing where you are and where you want to go. Then choosing practices that support your development. The goal isn't to become as detached as possible. The goal is to develop the appropriate level of detachment for your life circumstances and personal goals. Chapter 5. Breaking Free from Everyone Else's Emotional Weather. Here's something that might blow your mind. A huge chunk of the emotions you're experiencing right now aren't even yours. Let me explain. If you're naturally empathetic, if you're someone who picks up on other people's moods easily, you've probably spent your entire life unconsciously absorbing everyone else's emotional energy like a sponge. You walk into a room and immediately sense the tension before anyone says a word. You have coffee with a stressed friend and leave feeling anxious yourself. You watch the news and carry the weight of tragedies happening to people you've never met. And here's what nobody tells you. This isn't compassion. This is emotional codependence, and it's destroying you. When you absorb someone else's emotions, you're not helping them. You're just adding your suffering to theirs. You become less capable of actually supporting them because you're too busy drowning in your own reaction to their situation. You lose your clarity, your center, your ability to respond effectively. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Rachel. Rachel was the friend everyone called when they had a problem. She was proud of this. It made her feel needed, important, like she mattered. But here's what was actually happening. When her friend Lisa called crying about a breakup, Rachel would absorb all of Lisa's pain. She'd spend the next 3 days unable to focus on her own life because she was so consumed with worry about Lisa. She'd replay the conversation over and over, thinking about what she should have said, wondering if Lisa was okay, feeling personally responsible for fixing Lisa's emotional state. When her coworker Tom complained about their manager, Rachel would take on his frustration. She'd leave work angry about situations that didn't even directly affect her. She'd vent to her partner about Tom's problems as if they were her own. Rachel thought this was what it meant to be a good friend, a caring person. But what was actually happening? She was emotionally exhausted. She had no energy left for her own life. Her relationship suffered because she was always carrying everyone else's emotional baggage. And ironically, she wasn't actually helping anyone. She was just creating more emotional chaos. The truth that nobody wants to hear is this: you are not responsible for other people's emotions, and other people's emotions are not your responsibility. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you recognize that everyone is having their own emotional experience, and trying to control or absorb those experiences is both impossible and harmful. Think about it this way. When someone you love is struggling, what do they actually need? Do they need you to panic with them? Do they need you to take on their anxiety so now 2 people are drowning instead of 1? Or do they need you to stay grounded so you can actually think clearly and offer real support? When your friend is freaking out about a problem, they don't need another person freaking out. They need someone who can say, "I hear you. This sounds really difficult. Let's think through this together." And you can't do that if you've absorbed their panic. When your partner comes home stressed from work, they don't need you to match their stress. They need you to be a calm presence that helps them remember everything is going to be okay. But if you've taken on their emotional state, you're just adding fuel to the fire. Your emotional stability becomes a gift you give to others. It creates a safe space where people can feel their emotions fully without fear that they'll overwhelm you. It allows you to be truly present with someone's experience rather than being consumed by your reaction to their experience. But breaking free from emotional absorption requires more than just understanding. It requires developing practical skills for maintaining your energetic boundaries. First, you need to learn to recognize when you're absorbing emotions that aren't yours. This is harder than it sounds because if you're used to taking on other people's feelings, you might not even realize you're doing it. Start paying attention to how your emotional state changes in different environments and around different people. Do you feel drained after spending time with certain individuals? Does your mood shift dramatically based on the emotional atmosphere of your workplace? Are you carrying anxiety that doesn't actually relate to your own life? Here's a powerful question to ask yourself. Is this feeling mine, or am I picking it up from someone else? Often just asking this question creates enough distance to break the automatic absorption pattern. Let me give you a technique that's incredibly effective. When you notice yourself feeling upset after interacting with someone, pause. Close your eyes if you can. Take a few deep breaths. Then imagine yourself standing under a waterfall. Visualize all the emotions that aren't yours washing off your body and flowing away. See yourself surrounded by a gentle but firm boundary that allows love to pass through but filters out the emotional chaos that doesn't belong to you. This might sound too simple to work, but your nervous system responds to imagery. When you visualize this boundary, you're giving your subconscious mind permission to let go of what isn't yours. Another crucial practice is what I call emotional hygiene. Just like you shower to clean your physical body, you need practices to cleanse your energetic body of emotions you've picked up throughout the day. For some people, this is physical movement. A run, yoga, dancing in your living room. Movement helps discharge emotional energy. For others, it's time in nature. There's something about being around trees and water that helps reset your emotional baseline. For some, it's creative expression. Writing, painting, music, whatever helps you return to your natural state. The key is making this a regular practice, not something you only do when you're completely overwhelmed. Now, let's talk about boundaries, because this is where most empathetic people struggle. You've probably been taught that setting boundaries is selfish, that if you really cared about people, you'd always be available. That saying no means you're cold or uncaring. This is absolute nonsense. Maintaining your emotional equilibrium is not selfish. It's essential, and it actually makes you more caring, not less. When you're not constantly overwhelmed by other people's emotions, you have more energy to offer genuine support. When you're not trying to fix everyone's feelings, you can be truly present with their experience. When you're not taking things personally, you can respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. Setting emotional boundaries means being willing to step away from conversations that are becoming emotionally overwhelming. It means limiting your exposure to people who are chronically negative or dramatic. It means refusing to take responsibility for other people's emotional states. It means learning to say things like, I can see you're really upset and I care about you, but I'm not in a place to hold this right now. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Or, I want to support you, but I notice this conversation is starting to drain me. What if we take a break and come back to it? This isn't cruel, this is honest, and most healthy people will respect it. Here's what's liberating about emotional boundaries. When you stop trying to manage everyone else's feelings, you give them the space to develop their own emotional intelligence. When you stop absorbing their emotions, you model what healthy boundaries look like. When you maintain your center, you become someone others can rely on for actual stability instead of shared suffering. Think about the difference between empathy and emotional absorption. Empathy is understanding what someone is feeling without taking on those feelings yourself. It's saying, I can see you're in pain, and I'm here with you. Emotional absorption is saying, your pain is now my pain, and we're both drowning. One is sustainable and genuinely helpful. The other is exhausting and ultimately useless. Remember, your emotional state is your responsibility, and it's also your power. Every time you allow someone else's emotions to control how you feel, you're giving away your power to choose your own experience. Every time you absorb feelings that don't belong to you, you're diluting your own emotional clarity. True compassion means allowing people to have their own emotional experiences while offering support from a place of strength rather than shared suffering. It means caring without carrying, loving without losing yourself, and supporting without sacrificing your well-being. This isn't selfishness. This is emotional intelligence. And it's the foundation of healthy relationships and genuine service to others. Chapter 6. The power of watching your mind without getting lost in it. Here's a question that might change everything. Who is it that notices your thinking? Think about that for a second. Right now, you can observe that you're reading these words. You can notice thoughts arising in your mind about what you're reading. You might be agreeing, disagreeing, remembering something related, planning what you're going to do next. But who's doing the noticing? If you're watching your thoughts, then you can't be your thoughts. If you're aware of your emotions, then you can't be your emotions. So, who are you? Most people spend their entire lives completely identified with their mental and emotional activity. When they have a thought, they believe it. When they feel an emotion, they become it. When something happens, they react automatically. This complete identification with internal experience is what keeps them trapped in cycles of reactivity and suffering. But here's the truth that can set you free. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that observes them. This isn't some abstract philosophy. This is practical psychology that changes how you experience every moment of your life. When you learn to step back and watch your internal experience rather than being consumed by it, you gain the power to choose your responses instead of being forced into automatic reactions. Let me break this down with an example. Imagine you're about to give an important presentation. As the moment approaches, you notice thoughts arising. What if I mess up? What if people think I'm incompetent? What if I forget what I'm supposed to say? Most people immediately identify with these thoughts. They become the thoughts. The thoughts feel like truth. like accurate predictions of the future, like important warnings that need to be taken seriously. And because they've become the thoughts, they now feel anxious, and that anxiety affects their performance. But what if you could observe those thoughts without becoming them? What if you could notice, there's an anxious thought. My mind is generating worst-case scenarios because it's trying to protect me from potential embarrassment. Interesting. The thought is still there, but you're not drowning in it. You've created space between the awareness and the content. This space is where your freedom lives. Here's a practice that's deceptively simple but incredibly powerful. Throughout your day, start narrating your internal experience as if you were a scientist observing your own mind. Not judging, just noting. I notice tension in my shoulders. I observe thoughts about tomorrow's deadline. I see frustration arising about this traffic. I feel excitement about tonight's plans. This simple shift in language creates profound change. Instead of, I am anxious, you say, there is anxiety. Instead of, I am angry, you say, there is anger present. Instead of, I am overwhelmed, you say, there is a feeling of overwhelm. You're not denying the experience. You're not pushing it away. You're just creating a little distance between the observer, the real you, and the observed, the temporary experience. At first, this feels awkward. Your habitual patterns will pull you back into identification. You'll catch yourself getting lost in thoughts, swept away by emotions, consumed by reactions. This is completely normal. The goal isn't to never get caught up. The goal is to notice more quickly when you do and return to the observer perspective more easily. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Marcus. Marcus was a lawyer, constantly dealing with high-pressure situations, difficult clients, opposing counsel who would try to get under his skin. His default pattern was to take everything personally, to get emotionally invested in every battle, to lie awake at night, replaying confrontations. Then he learned this practice of observing without identifying. In a heated negotiation, when opposing counsel said something that would normally send him into defensive mode, Marcus noticed, there's anger arising, there's a desire to defend, there's tension in my chest. Just by observing these responses instead of automatically acting on them, he created space. In that space, he could choose. He could respond strategically instead of reactively. He could stay focused on his client's best interests instead of getting caught up in ego battles. Same external circumstances, completely different internal experience. That's the power of the observer perspective. Here's what makes this so transformative. When you're watching your thoughts and emotions, you start to notice patterns. You see the same thoughts arising over and over. You recognize familiar emotional triggers. You observe how your mind works, and this observation itself begins to change the patterns. You start to see thoughts as mental events rather than truth. You experience emotions as temporary visitors rather than permanent residents. You recognize sensations as information rather than commands. This doesn't mean you stop thinking or feeling. You think more clearly because you're not caught up in mental loops. You feel more fully because you're not trying to suppress or avoid emotions. You respond more effectively because you're not being compulsive about every sensation. The observer perspective also reveals something profound about the nature of your suffering. Most of your pain doesn't come from what happens to you. It comes from your resistance to what happens to you. When you observe your experience without immediately judging it or trying to change it, you often discover that the experience itself is manageable. It's your reaction to the experience that creates the suffering. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're feeling sad. If you immediately identify with that sadness, you might spiral. I'm so sad. Why am I always sad? What's wrong with me? I should be happy. Other people are happy. There must be something broken in me. Now you're not just experiencing sadness. You're experiencing sadness plus shame about being sad, plus anxiety about being broken, plus frustration about not being different. The original sadness was one thing. Your reaction to it created 5 more layers of suffering. But what if you could simply observe, there is sadness present. You let it be there. You don't try to fix it immediately or figure out why it's there or shame yourself for feeling it. You just notice it, like you'd notice clouds passing through the sky. Often, when you stop fighting your experience and just observe it, the experience naturally shifts and flows. Emotions that felt stuck suddenly move through your system. Thoughts that seemed overwhelming lose their intensity. The resistance was keeping them locked in place. This is the foundation of all emotional detachment. When you can watch your internal experience without being consumed by it, you access a part of yourself that remains calm and centered regardless of what's happening around you or within you. This observing awareness never gets angry, anxious, or depressed. It simply witnesses whatever arises with complete neutrality. The more you identify with this awareness rather than with your temporary experiences, the more unshakable your inner peace becomes. Chapter 7. How to Care Deeply While Holding Loosely. Let's tackle one of the biggest fears people have about emotional detachment. They think if they stop being attached to outcomes, they'll lose their drive. They'll become lazy, unmotivated, willing to accept mediocrity. They believe their anxiety about results is what keeps them performing. This is backwards, completely backwards. Attachment to outcomes doesn't increase your effectiveness. It sabotages it. Let me show you why. When you're desperately attached to a specific result, you create anxiety, and anxiety interferes with performance. You can't think clearly when you're anxious. You can't be creative when you're terrified of failure. You can't take necessary risks when your self-worth depends on everything going perfectly. Attachment makes you rigid. It locks you into one specific vision of success and blinds you to alternative paths. It causes you to grip so tightly that you squeeze the life out of what you're trying to create. Think about trying to hold water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more it leaks out. The looser you hold your hand, the more water you can carry. That's the paradox of attachment and detachment. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Sophie. Sophie wanted to be a writer more than anything. She'd pour her heart into her work, then send it out to publishers. Every rejection felt like a personal condemnation. Every piece of critical feedback destroyed her for days. Her self-worth was completely tied to whether editors and publishers validated her work. This attachment was killing her creativity. She couldn't write freely because she was constantly worried about how it would be received. She couldn't experiment with new styles because she was terrified of failure. She couldn't enjoy the process because she was so focused on the outcome. Then something shifted. After another devastating rejection, Sophie realized she had two choices: quit writing entirely or change her relationship with it. She chose the latter. She started writing for the sake of writing. She measured success by whether she showed up to the page every day, whether she was growing as a writer, whether she was expressing what was alive in her. Whether anyone published it became secondary to the act of creation itself. Paradoxically, this detachment made her work better. She took more risks. She wrote more authentically. She experimented with her voice, and eventually, yes, she got published. But more importantly, she enjoyed the journey. She found fulfillment in the process rather than postponing happiness until some external validation arrived. This is what outcome detachment looks like. You care deeply. You work intensely. You give your best effort. But your emotional well-being doesn't depend on getting exactly what you want. Here's the key distinction. You can control your effort, but you cannot control your results. You can control how much time you invest, how much energy you bring, how much skill you develop, how persistent you are. You cannot control market conditions, other people's decisions, timing, luck, or countless other variables that influence outcome. When you try to control results directly, you waste enormous energy on things outside your influence while neglecting the things you can actually control. Let me give you a framework for this. Start measuring success differently. Instead of only evaluating based on external results, include process-based metrics. Did I give my best effort today? Did I act in alignment with my values? Did I learn something valuable? Did I grow through this challenge? Did I show up even when it was difficult? These measures give you ways to feel successful, even when external results don't match your expectations. They shift your focus from things you can't control to things you can. Here's another powerful practice. Regularly remind yourself what you can and cannot control. Make two lists. On one side, write down factors you can influence in pursuing your goal. On the other side, write factors completely outside your control. Whenever you catch yourself worrying about or trying to manipulate something from the second list, redirect your attention to the first list. This mental discipline keeps you focused on productive action rather than wasteful anxiety. Let's talk about visualization, because most people use it wrong. They visualize only their perfect outcome, which actually increases attachment. Instead, practice this. Imagine yourself working toward your goal with complete dedication. Then imagine various outcomes: complete success, partial success, unexpected failure, and everything in between. Now, imagine yourself responding to each scenario with calm and wisdom. See yourself maintaining your center regardless of what happens. This mental rehearsal prepares you to stay grounded no matter what actually occurs. Outcome detachment also requires developing a longer-term perspective. Most things that seem crucial in the moment turn out to be far less significant in the context of your entire life. The job you didn't get might have led to a better opportunity. The relationship that ended might have cleared the path for someone more compatible. The business that failed might have taught you lessons essential for your next venture. You can't always see this in the moment, but looking back, the pattern becomes clear. Here's what's liberating about outcome detachment. It frees you to enjoy the journey instead of postponing happiness until you reach some destination. When you're attached to outcomes, you tell yourself, I'll be happy when I get the promotion, when I find the relationship, when I make the money, when I achieve the recognition. This conditional happiness ensures you spend most of your life waiting to feel good. Outcome detachment lets you find satisfaction in the process of growth, learning, contribution. You can enjoy developing new skills, solving creative problems, giving your best effort. Your happiness becomes independent of external circumstances. Let me be clear about something. This is not about lowering your standards. This is not about accepting mediocrity. This is about raising your standards for how you show up in the process while releasing your grip on specific results. It's about committing fully to your vision while remaining flexible about the path. It's about caring deeply while holding lightly. Think about the most successful people you know. They don't fall apart when things don't go as planned. They pivot, they adapt, they learn, they maintain their commitment to their mission while being flexible about tactics. They understand that results are feedback about the effectiveness of their actions, not judgments about their worth as human beings. This is the balance you're aiming for. Care passionately about your goals. Work intensely toward them. Give everything you have to the process. But don't let your emotional well-being depend on controlling the uncontrollable. When you master this, everything changes. You take bigger risks because you're not paralyzed by fear of failure. You persist longer because setbacks don't devastate you. You stay motivated because you find fulfillment in the process itself, not just in outcomes. You become the kind of person who can weather any storm while maintaining your commitment to what matters. And ironically, that's exactly the kind of person who tends to achieve the outcomes they desire. Chapter 8. Understanding your emotional triggers and hot buttons. Everyone has triggers. Those specific situations, words, or behaviors that bypass your rational mind and send you straight into emotional reaction mode. Maybe it's being criticized. Maybe it's feeling ignored. Maybe it's being told you're wrong. Maybe it's having your abilities questioned. These triggers aren't random. They're connected to your deepest insecurities, your unhealed wounds, your unconscious fears. They represent areas where you're still seeking validation, approval, or recognition from the outside world. And until you understand them, they control you. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Alex. Alex was a talented manager, but he had one major trigger: being questioned in front of his team. Whenever someone challenged his decision in a meeting, he'd get defensive. His voice would get sharp. He'd shut down the conversation. He'd sometimes even attack the person who asked the question. This pattern was damaging his leadership. His team learned not to bring up concerns or offer alternative perspectives. Innovation suffered. Trust eroded. And Alex couldn't figure out why people seemed afraid to speak openly around him. The trigger wasn't the questioning itself. The trigger was what the questioning activated in Alex's nervous system. Deep down, he was insecure about his competence. Being questioned in front of others felt like proof that people didn't respect him, that they thought he was incompetent, that he didn't deserve his position. So his alarm system would go off, fight or flight. His defensive reaction wasn't about the current situation. It was about protecting against a perceived threat to his identity. Once Alex understood this, he could start working with it. He began to notice the physical sensations that preceded his defensive reactions. The tightening in his chest, the heat rising in his face, the urge to shut the person down. These physical signals became his early warning system. When he felt them, he'd pause, take a breath, remind himself that a question isn't an attack, that someone offering a different perspective doesn't mean they don't respect him. This is the work of mastering your triggers. First, you have to identify them with brutal honesty. What situations consistently make you lose your equilibrium? What types of comments send you into defensive mode? What behaviors from others make you feel angry, hurt, or anxious? Most people avoid this self-examination because it requires acknowledging their vulnerabilities. It's easier to blame other people for making you feel certain ways than to take responsibility for your own reactions. But here's the truth. Nobody makes you feel anything. They trigger reactions that are already in your system. They're activating patterns that were established long before you met them. Once you've identified your triggers, the next step is understanding their origins. Most triggers are rooted in experiences where you felt diminished, threatened, or invalidated. Maybe you were harshly criticized as a child, so now any feedback feels like an attack. Maybe you were excluded from groups, so now feeling left out activates deep insecurity. Maybe you were made to feel incompetent, so now having your abilities questioned sends you into defensive mode. Understanding the origin doesn't excuse reactive behavior, but it helps you respond with compassion rather than judgment when triggers get activated. It also helps you realize that your triggers are often about the past, not the present situation. The goal isn't to eliminate triggers entirely. That's unrealistic. The goal is to increase the gap between trigger and reaction. To give yourself time to choose a response rather than being forced into an automatic pattern. Your body signals when you're being triggered before your mind recognizes it. Learn to pay attention to physical sensations. Jaw clenching, shoulders tensing, breath becoming shallow, stomach tightening, heart racing. These physical signals are your early warning system. When you notice them, you can pause, create space. Buy yourself time to choose your response instead of being hijacked by automatic reactions. Here's a powerful reframing technique. When someone criticizes your work, instead of immediately interpreting it as an attack on your competence, you can reframe it. This is information about how to improve, or this is insight into their perspective. When someone seems to exclude you, instead of assuming it's personal rejection, consider other explanations. They might be dealing with their own stress, or this might not be about me at all. This reframing isn't about making excuses for genuinely poor behavior. It's about giving yourself options for interpretation instead of being locked into trigger-based reactions. Another strategy: prepare responses in advance for your common triggers. If you know being interrupted makes you angry, plan a calm way to address it. I'd appreciate if I could finish my thought. If you know being questioned about decisions makes you defensive, prepare a response that invites dialogue. Good question. Here's my thinking, and I'd like to hear yours. Having prepared responses prevents you from scrambling when you're triggered. which often leads to saying things you don't mean. Here's something crucial to understand. Other people's behavior often says more about them than about you. When someone is critical, dismissive, or aggressive, they're usually expressing their own pain, stress, or insecurity, rather than making accurate assessments about your worth. This doesn't excuse poor behavior, but it helps you avoid taking things personally. One of the most liberating realizations is this: you don't need other people to behave differently for you to feel good about yourself. Your well-being doesn't depend on receiving constant approval, validation, or recognition. When you stop needing other people to treat you a certain way in order to feel okay, their behavior loses its power to trigger you. This shift from external validation to internal validation is fundamental to emotional detachment. It means developing your own standards for measuring your worth that don't depend on other people's opinions or behaviors. The ultimate goal is to reach a place where you can observe your triggers arising without being controlled by them. You notice the familiar physical sensations, the predictable thoughts, the automatic emotional responses. But you don't identify with them. You see them as conditioned patterns from your past rather than accurate information about your current situation. This level of mastery doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent practice, self-compassion, patience with yourself as you develop new response patterns. But every time you catch yourself before reacting, every time you choose a thoughtful response over an automatic reaction, you're rewiring your nervous system for greater freedom. Remember, mastering your triggers isn't about becoming passive or allowing poor treatment. It's about responding from your strength rather than your wounds, from your wisdom rather than your reactivity, from your values rather than your conditioning. When you're no longer controlled by your triggers, you become truly free to choose how you want to show up in any situation. Chapter 9: The Transformative Art of Rewriting Your Story. Here's a truth that will change everything once you really get it. Your emotional reactions aren't caused by what happens to you. They're caused by the story you tell yourself about what happens to you. Let me prove it. Imagine two people get the exact same text from their romantic partner. "We need to talk." Person A immediately spirals. "Oh no, they're going to break up with me. I knew this was coming. I'm not good enough. This always happens to me. I'm going to end up alone." Person B reads the same text and thinks, they probably want to discuss weekend plans. Or maybe there's something on their mind they want to share. I'll call them and find out. Same text. Completely different emotional experience. The difference isn't in what happened. The difference is in the interpretation. Every situation can be interpreted in multiple ways, and the interpretation you choose determines your emotional response. Most people don't realize they're choosing. Their interpretations feel so automatic, so obvious, that they mistake them for reality. But they're not reality. They're one possible story about reality. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Nina. Nina was passed over for a promotion at work. Her immediate interpretation: they don't value my work. I'm not good enough. I'll never advance here. This company doesn't appreciate me. With that interpretation, she felt angry, discouraged, inadequate. She started looking for other jobs out of resentment. She became withdrawn at work. Her performance actually declined because She'd lost motivation. But what if the story was different? What if her manager saw more growth potential for her in her current role? What if they were actually protecting her from a position that would have been a poor fit? What if this was redirecting her toward something better? Nina couldn't know which story was true, but she chose the story that created the most suffering, and then lived inside that suffering as if it were fact. Here's the thing. You're always telling yourself stories about why people do what they do, about what events mean, about who you are and what's possible for you. These stories are so constant, so automatic, that you don't even notice you're creating them. And most of these stories are limiting, negative, and based on incomplete information. When someone doesn't text you back, you tell yourself a story. When your idea gets rejected, you tell yourself a story. When something doesn't work out the way you planned, you tell yourself a story. And usually, that story makes you feel worse than the actual situation warrants. So here's the practice that creates profound freedom. Ask yourself, what else could this mean? When you catch yourself making negative interpretations, pause. Brainstorm at least 3 alternative explanations. This simple exercise breaks you out of tunnel vision and reminds you that your first interpretation is just one possibility among many. Someone didn't respond to your message. Maybe they're overwhelmed with their own stuff. Maybe they're thinking carefully about how to respond. Maybe they haven't seen it yet. Maybe their phone died. You don't know. Your proposal got rejected. Maybe the timing wasn't right. Maybe they don't have budget. Maybe they're dealing with internal politics. Maybe there's a better opportunity coming. You don't know. Here's another powerful reframe. Ask yourself how someone you deeply admire would interpret this situation. How would a wise mentor see it? How would someone with tremendous resilience understand what you're experiencing? Let me give you an example. Imagine you failed at something important. Your automatic story might be, I'm a failure. I'm not cut out for this. I should give up. But what would someone resilient say? This is information. Now I know what doesn't work. This is part of the learning process. Every successful person has failures. This is building my character. Same facts. Completely different emotional experience. You can also shift your temporal perspective. Ask yourself, how will I see this situation in 1 month? 1 year? 5 years? Most things that feel catastrophic in the moment become minor bumps when viewed from a longer timeline. The breakup that felt like the end of the world. In 2 years, you might see it as the necessary ending that made space for the right person. The job loss that devastated you. In 5 years, you might see it as the push you needed to find work you actually love. This temporal perspective doesn't minimize real pain. It helps you maintain proportion and avoid emotional overwhelm about temporary circumstances. Here's another crucial shift. Moving from victim consciousness to creator consciousness. Victim consciousness says, this is happening to me. I have no control. Life is unfair. I'm powerless. Creator consciousness says, this is happening. I can't control the event, but I can control my response. What can I learn? How can I grow? What opportunity might this create? Let me be clear. This isn't about blaming yourself for things outside your control. It's about recognizing that you always have power over your interpretation and response. When something disappointing happens, Victim consciousness focuses on what you lost. Creator consciousness focuses on what you might gain. Victim consciousness asks, why me? Creator consciousness asks, what now? You can also practice philosophical perspective shifts. When facing challenges, ask, how would a Stoic philosopher view this? They'd see it as an opportunity to practice virtue and build character. How would someone with deep spiritual faith approach this? They might see it as part of a larger purpose they can't fully understand yet. How would someone who believes in growth through adversity interpret this? They'd see it as necessary resistance that makes them stronger. Again, the goal isn't finding the right perspective. The goal is realizing you have options. When you're stuck in one interpretation that's causing suffering, exploring different viewpoints can free you. Here's something else that's transformative: reframing from scarcity to abundance. Scarcity thinking says, there aren't enough opportunities. Success is limited. I'm running out of time. This was my only chance. Abundance thinking says, opportunities are constantly emerging. There are multiple paths to success. Setbacks are setups for better outcomes. What's meant for me won't miss me. When you didn't get that job, scarcity says there are no good opportunities left. Abundance says this clears the way for an even better fit. When a relationship ends, scarcity says you'll never find love again. Abundance says you've learned what you need and now you're ready for the right person. The interpretation you choose literally shapes your reality. Not because thoughts magically change external circumstances, but because your interpretation determines your emotional state, which determines your energy, which determines your actions, which determines your results. If you interpret a setback as proof you're doomed to fail, you'll give up. If you interpret it as valuable feedback, you'll persist and improve. Same setback, completely different outcome based on the story you told yourself. Here's the liberation in all of this. You are the author of your internal experience. Events happen, but you write the story about what they mean. And when you realize you're writing the story, you can choose to write a better one. Not a delusional story that denies reality. Not toxic positivity that pretends everything is perfect, but a story that serves your growth, your peace, and your possibility, rather than one that keeps you trapped in suffering. This is perspective shifting, and it's one of the most powerful tools for emotional detachment, because it reveals that your reactions aren't caused by events. They're caused by interpretations, and interpretations can always be examined, questioned, and changed. Chapter 10. Building a peace that nothing can shake. Most people think peace is something that happens when everything goes right, when their problems are solved, when people treat them well, when circumstances align perfectly. They're waiting for external conditions to grant them internal stability. This is why they never find it. True peace isn't the absence of challenges. It's the presence of an unshakable center that remains steady, regardless of what's happening around you. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. Peace is your natural state. Beneath all the mental noise, emotional reactivity, and external chaos, there's a part of you that's always calm, always whole, always at peace. You don't need to create this peace. You need to uncover it by removing the layers that obscure it. Your thinking mind is the primary obstacle. It's constantly generating thoughts, judgments, stories, interpretations. It's analyzing the past, planning the future, commenting on the present. This mental activity isn't problematic in itself, but when you identify completely with your thoughts, they disturb your peace. The key is learning to use your mind as a tool rather than being used by it. This means developing the ability to think when thinking is helpful and to be still when stillness is more appropriate. Think about waves on the ocean. The surface is constantly moving, churning, changing. But deep beneath the surface, there's stillness. The waves don't disturb the depths. You're like that ocean. Your thoughts and emotions are the surface waves, but there's a depth in you that remains undisturbed. Peace lives in that depth. How do you access it? By learning to shift your attention from the surface to the depths, by recognizing that you are not the waves, you are the entire ocean. Emotional reactivity is another major disturbance. When you're constantly reacting to internal and external triggers, you live in perpetual agitation. Everything feels urgent. Every situation demands an emotional response. Every challenge threatens your well-being. This is why all the practices we've discussed, observing without reacting, detaching from outcomes, managing triggers, are essential for peace. They create space between you and the emotional chaos that keeps most people trapped. But here's something equally important: accepting what you cannot control. How much energy do you waste trying to control things outside your influence? Trying to control other people's behavior, trying to force specific outcomes, trying to make reality conform to your preferences. All that effort creates friction, resistance, suffering. Peace comes from distinguishing between what you can influence and what you cannot, then putting your energy where it can actually make a difference. You can influence your thoughts by choosing where to direct your attention. You can influence your responses by developing self-awareness and practicing new patterns. You can influence your actions by aligning them with your values. You can influence your environment by making conscious choices about who and what you expose yourself to. You cannot control other people's choices. You cannot control external events. You cannot force outcomes. You cannot make reality different than it is in this moment. When you stop fighting what you cannot control and focus on what you can influence, enormous energy becomes available. Energy that was being wasted on resistance can now be directed toward creative action. This acceptance isn't resignation, it's wisdom. It's understanding that arguing with reality is the source of most suffering. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Daniel. Daniel's teenage daughter was making choices he didn't agree with. He spent enormous energy trying to control her decisions, lecturing her, monitoring her, constantly arguing with her about every choice. The result? Their relationship deteriorated. She pulled away. He was constantly stressed and angry, and his attempts to control her actually pushed her further toward the behaviors he was trying to prevent. When Daniel finally accepted that he couldn't control his daughter's choices, everything shifted. He could express his concerns without demanding compliance. He could offer guidance without forcing outcomes. He could maintain connection even when he disagreed with her decisions. Paradoxically, when he stopped trying to control her, she became more receptive to his input. When he stopped making every conversation a battle, she started actually listening. This is the power of acceptance, not approving of everything, not being passive, but recognizing what's actually within your control and releasing your grip on what isn't. Present moment awareness is another key to unshakable peace. Peace only exists now. Your mind creates. Suffering by dwelling on past events you cannot change or worrying about future scenarios that may never occur. Right now, in this exact moment, are you okay? Not your projected future, not your past regrets. Right now, reading these words, are you fundamentally okay? Most people discover that yes, right now they're okay. Whatever challenges they're facing, whatever problems need solving, in this present moment, they're safe and whole. This doesn't mean ignoring practical planning or learning from experience. It means recognizing that your actual life is happening now. This moment is the only one where you can experience peace, make changes, or take action. The more you practice bringing your attention fully into the present, the more peace becomes your default state. You can also cultivate what I call cosmic perspective. When you see your challenges in the context of your entire life journey, they become less overwhelming. When you view your problems in the context of human existence and the vastness of the universe, they become more manageable. This perspective doesn't minimize real difficulties. It helps you maintain equilibrium during difficult periods. Imagine looking at your life from space. All your problems, concerns, conflicts would appear as tiny specks on a small planet in an infinite universe. This doesn't mean they don't matter. It means they're part of something larger. You're part of something larger. Creating supportive practices is essential for maintaining peace. This might include daily meditation, time in nature, reading wisdom teachings, connecting with people who embody peace, limiting exposure to toxic media or relationships. These practices aren't about avoiding life's challenges. They're about creating a strong foundation you can draw upon when difficulties arise. Think of it like physical fitness. You don't start exercising only when you need to run from danger. You build strength and endurance during calm periods so you're prepared when challenges come. Same with inner peace. You practice connecting with your peaceful center during relatively calm moments so you can access it during storms. Here's the ultimate truth about peace. It's not dependent on external circumstances. It's not something that happens when your problems are solved. It's a way of being you can choose in each moment. Right now, regardless of what's happening in your life, peace is available. Not because everything is perfect, but because beneath the surface chaos, there's a stillness that's always been there, always will be there, waiting for you to remember it. This peace is your birthright, your natural state, your deepest truth. And every practice in this entire work is ultimately about removing the obstacles that keep you from experiencing it. Chapter 11. Making Wise Choices. When everything feels urgent, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your decisions. Yet most people make their most important choices while drowning in emotions, reacting to pressure, or running from discomfort. They choose careers to impress others rather than fulfill themselves. They enter relationships out of loneliness rather than genuine connection. They make financial decisions driven by fear or greed. They avoid opportunities because anxiety tells them to stay safe. Emotional detachment transforms decision-making by creating space between the choice and the emotions swirling around it. When you can step back from the emotional charge, you gain access to clarity and wisdom that's impossible when you're caught in reactive patterns. The biggest mistake people make is believing they need to feel good about a decision in order to make it. This emotional requirement keeps them trapped in comfort zones, avoiding necessary changes because those changes feel uncomfortable. But growth requires discomfort. Important decisions often feel challenging precisely because they're asking you to become bigger than you currently are. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Isabel. Isabel was offered a position leading a new department at her company. It was a massive opportunity. More responsibility, better pay, chance to create something from scratch. But she was terrified. She'd never led a team this large. She worried about failing publicly. She felt anxious every time she thought about it. If Isabel made the decision based on how she felt, she would have turned it down. Fear would have won. But Isabel had learned to separate her emotions from her decision-making process. She acknowledged the fear without letting it drive the decision. She asked, "If fear wasn't a factor, what would I choose? What does this opportunity align with my long-term goals? What's the worst that could happen, and could I handle it?" The worst case? She'd struggle, learn, and potentially return to her previous role, uncomfortable but survivable. The best case? She'd grow tremendously and launch her career to a new level. Isabel took the job. It was hard. She made mistakes. She had moments of doubt. But she grew more in that year than in the previous 5 combined. Here's the framework for emotionally detached decision-making. First, recognize when emotions are clouding your judgment. Notice when you feel desperate for a particular outcome, when you're afraid of a specific consequence, when you're trying to prove something to yourself or others. These emotional charges signal that you need to step back before choosing. Second, separate facts from interpretations. What actually happened versus what you think it means. What are your objective options versus how you feel about those options? What information do you have versus what assumptions you're making? Third, consider long-term consequences, not just immediate emotional payoff. The choice that feels best right now might create problems later. The choice that feels difficult might lead to better outcomes. Ask, how will I feel about each option in 1 year? 5 years? Will my future self thank me for this choice or regret it? Fourth, remove social pressure. Ask yourself, what would I choose if nobody else would ever know? If I didn't have to explain this to family, friends, colleagues? If I wasn't trying to maintain an image or meet others' expectations? This reveals your authentic preferences beneath conditioning. Fifth, practice worst-case scenario thinking. For each option, imagine the worst possible outcome and ask if you could handle it. Often, you'll discover that even worst-case scenarios are manageable. This reduces the emotional intensity and allows more rational evaluation. Also, practice best-case thinking to avoid being overly conservative. What could happen if everything goes better than expected? Are you limiting your potential by always choosing safe options? Sixth, use decision criteria that align with your values. Before evaluating options, clarify what matters most. Financial security, creative fulfillment, family time, personal growth, impact on others. Then evaluate each option against these criteria rather than against temporary emotions. Seventh, make important decisions when you're calm, not when you're stressed or reactive. Sleep on major choices when possible. Discuss options with trusted advisors who can provide perspective without agenda. Let me give you another example. Someone I'll call Carlos was in a relationship that wasn't working. His partner was consistently unreliable, broke promises, created drama. But Carlos felt attached. The thought of ending it made him anxious and sad. If Carlos made the decision based on how he felt about the breakup, he'd stay in the unhealthy relationship indefinitely. But he learned to separate the temporary pain of ending things from the long-term benefit of being free. He asked, "In 5 years, will I be grateful I stayed or grateful I left? Is this fear of temporary pain keeping me in permanent dysfunction?" The decision became clear. Yes, the breakup would hurt. But staying would hurt more, just spread over years instead of months. Here's something crucial. No decision is perfect. Some uncertainty always exists. Perfectionism in decision-making is actually a form of emotional attachment that keeps you stuck. Sometimes, the best choice is simply to choose and remain flexible enough to adapt as new information becomes available. Remember, you can usually recover from a poor decision, but you can't recover time lost to indecision. Most choices are reversible or adjustable. The opportunity cost of remaining stuck often exceeds the cost of making an imperfect choice and adapting. The goal isn't to become an emotionless decision-making machine. Your feelings provide valuable information about your needs and values, but they shouldn't be the primary driver, especially under pressure or during significant changes. When you master detached decision-making, you gain confidence in your ability to navigate challenges. You stop avoiding difficult choices because you trust yourself to handle consequences. You stop overthinking because you know you can adapt and adjust. You become someone who moves forward decisively while remaining responsive to reality. Chapter 12. Staying warm-hearted while staying free. Here's the question that stops most people from developing emotional detachment. If I stop being controlled by my emotions, will I become cold? Will I lose my capacity for love, connection, joy? This fear is real, and it's worth addressing directly because the answer determines whether you'll actually practice these principles or just understand them intellectually. The truth is this: emotional detachment and emotional warmth are not opposites. In fact, detachment actually increases your capacity for genuine connection. Let me show you why. When you're emotionally reactive and controlled by your feelings, you can't truly be present with others. You're too busy managing your own internal chaos. When someone shares their pain, you either absorb it and drown with them, or you shut down to protect yourself. Neither response is genuinely helpful. But when you're emotionally detached, you can be fully present without being overwhelmed. You can witness someone suffering without making it about you. You can offer support without taking ownership of their journey. You can love without needing to control. Think about the difference between need-based love and freedom-based love. Need-based love says, "I love you because you make me feel good, because you validate me, because you fill something missing in me. Stay exactly as you are because I need you this way." Freedom-based love says, I love you for who you are. I want you to grow and thrive, even if that means growing beyond me. I'm here because I choose to be, not because I need something from you. Which one is actually deeper? Which one creates more genuine connection? Detachment allows freedom-based love because you're not desperately attached to the other person, behaving in ways that maintain your emotional stability. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Emma. Emma was in a relationship where she was constantly anxious. She needed constant reassurance. She monitored her partner's mood. She took everything personally. She tried to control his behavior to manage her own insecurity. This wasn't love. This was emotional dependency disguised as caring. When Emma learned emotional detachment, her entire relationship transformed. She could appreciate her partner without needing him to be a certain way. She could enjoy his presence without requiring constant validation. She could love him while maintaining her own center. Paradoxically, this made their connection deeper. He felt less pressure. She felt more peace. They could actually be themselves around each other instead of constantly managing each other's emotions. Here's how to maintain warmth while developing detachment. First, practice expressing care through presence rather than intensity. Many people mistake emotional reactivity for caring. They think worrying about someone proves love. Getting upset about their problems shows concern. Trying to fix their issues demonstrates care. But true presence, the ability to be fully with someone without trying to change them, is often more helpful and certainly more sustainable. When someone you care about is struggling, offer them the gift of your calm presence. Listen without immediately solving. Acknowledge their experience without absorbing their emotional state. Support without taking over. This requires detachment because it asks you to care without carrying, empathize without absorbing, help without controlling. Second, express appreciation and affection without expecting specific responses. Tell people you love them because you want to express that truth, not because you need to hear it back. Compliment others because you genuinely appreciate something about them, not because you want compliments in return. This unconditional expression is possible when you're detached from outcomes. Third, set boundaries with love rather than anger. When you need to decline a request or address problematic behavior, you can do so from caring rather than reactivity. Boundaries set with detachment are firm but kind, clear but not cruel. They protect your well-being without punishing the other person for having needs you can't meet. Fourth, develop what I call loving detachment. This means caring deeply while refusing to carry emotional burdens that aren't yours. Offering support without taking responsibility for outcomes. Being present with someone's pain without trying to eliminate it for them. When you stop trying to manage other people's emotions, you give them space to develop their own emotional intelligence. When you maintain your center, you model what healthy boundaries look like. Fifth, practice unconditional positive regard. Maintain respect and caring for someone regardless of their behavior. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or enabling destructive patterns. It means recognizing inherent worth while addressing problematic actions. You can disapprove of someone's choices while caring about their well-being. You can set firm boundaries while maintaining compassion for their struggles. Sixth, Cultivate curiosity rather than judgment. When people behave in ways that trigger you, get curious instead of making it about yourself. What needs are they trying to meet? What fears might be driving their behavior? What pain might be underneath their difficult actions? This curious stance allows you to respond with wisdom and compassion rather than reactivity and defensiveness. Let me give you a contrast. Imagine your friend cancels plans at the last minute. Attached response. They obviously don't value my time. I'm not important to them. They're always doing this. I should stop making plans with them. Detached response. They must be dealing with something. I wonder what's going on. I'll check in and see if they're okay. Which response maintains warmth? Which one allows genuine connection? Here's what's beautiful about emotional detachment. It allows you to love more freely because you don't need love desperately. You can give generously because you're not keeping score. You can be vulnerable because you're not dependent on others for your sense of worth. You can invest in relationships because you enjoy them, not because you need them to feel complete. This makes you a better friend, partner, family member. People can count on you to remain stable during difficulties. They know you'll be honest about your needs and limitations. They know you're present for genuine connection without hidden agendas or emotional manipulation. Your warmth becomes sustainable because it's not draining you. Your care becomes effective because it's not controlled by reactivity. Your love becomes deeper because it's not contaminated by need. This is the art of emotional freedom without losing your heart. Feeling fully while being controlled by nothing, caring deeply while holding lightly, loving completely while remaining free. Chapter 13. Advanced Practices for Emotional Mastery. Once you've developed the basics, there are deeper practices that can take your emotional freedom to levels most people never experience. These aren't for everyone. But if you're serious about mastering your internal world, these advanced techniques will give you capabilities that seem almost superhuman to others. The first advanced practice is learning to work with emotional energy rather than emotional content. Most people get tangled in the stories their emotions tell. They analyze why they're angry, what their anxiety means, how to interpret their sadness. But emotions are fundamentally energy. You can work with them directly without getting involved in their narratives. Here's how. When you feel a strong emotion, don't immediately ask what it means or why it's there. Instead, focus on its energetic qualities. Where exactly do you feel it in your body? Is it hot or cold? Tight or expansive? Moving or static? Heavy or light? By relating to emotions as energy rather than stories, they often move through your system more quickly. You're not adding mental fuel to keep them burning. The second advanced technique is breathing with your emotions instead of against them. Most people unconsciously resist difficult emotions by holding their breath or breathing shallowly. This actually intensifies and prolongs the emotional experience. Instead, when an emotion arises, breathe deeply and smoothly directly into the area where you feel it. You're not trying to eliminate it or change it. You're just creating space for it to exist without resistance. Often, when you stop fighting your emotional experience and start breathing with it, emotions naturally shift and flow rather than staying stuck. Third, develop what I call the meta-observer. This is the practice of observing yourself observing. You notice you're having an emotional experience. Then you notice that you're aware of having this experience. Then you notice that you're aware of being aware. This progressive stepping back creates profound distance from even intense emotional states. You realize you're not the emotion, not even the observer of the emotion, but the awareness that contains all of it. Fourth, learn to catch emotions in their pre-formation stage. With practice, you can become aware of the subtle shift that happens just before an emotion fully forms. In this pre-emotional space, you have maximum choice. You can allow the emotion to form naturally, or you can consciously choose a different response altogether. This requires very subtle awareness and usually develops only after consistent practice. But once you can catch emotions before they fully form, you gain tremendous freedom. Fifth, practice emotional aikido. Instead of resisting difficult emotions or being overwhelmed by them, learn to move with them while maintaining your center. When someone directs criticism or anger toward you, imagine letting it flow past you like wind around a tree. You bend with the force while staying rooted in your stability. These advanced techniques aren't about eliminating your emotional life. They're about developing such mastery that you can choose how to engage with whatever arises. You become like a skilled conductor who can work with any instrument in the orchestra. Chapter 14. Making this your daily reality. The real test isn't whether you understand these principles. It's whether you can apply them when life gets messy, when you're triggered, stressed, overwhelmed, when people are difficult, when things don't go your way. Integration means making emotional detachment your default way of operating, not something you have to remember to practice. Start your day with intention, not reaction. Most people wake up and immediately check their phone, letting other people's agendas and emotions determine their state before they've even gotten out of bed. This reactive start sets the tone for hours of emotional reactivity. Instead, take even 5 minutes when you wake to center yourself. Set an intention for how you want to show up. Remind yourself that you have the power to choose your responses regardless of what you encounter. Create transition rituals between different parts of your day. When moving from home to work, from one activity to another, take a moment to consciously shift your energy. 3 deep breaths, a brief pause, a reminder of your commitment to emotional freedom. Practice micro-detachments throughout the day. You don't need extended sessions to apply these principles. When an email triggers you, pause before responding. When someone makes a comment that normally would upset you, observe your reaction before choosing your response. When you catch yourself worrying about things outside your control, redirect your attention to what you can actually influence. Use everyday activities as mindfulness practice, washing dishes, walking, eating. Use these moments to practice presence rather than operating on autopilot. These simple practices strengthen your ability to stay centered throughout the day. Develop your own standard responses to common triggers. Most people encounter similar challenging situations repeatedly. Instead of being caught off guard each time, prepare thoughtful responses in advance that align with your values. Set boundaries around your emotional energy. Be selective about which dramas you engage with. Limit exposure to unnecessarily negative influences. Protect time for practices that support your well-being. Create environmental supports. Keep reminders visible of these principles. Set phone alerts to check in with your emotional state. Surround yourself with things that help you remember your commitment to inner peace. Remember that integration is gradual. You won't apply these principles perfectly in every situation. There will be times when you react automatically, get caught in emotional drama, or forget everything you've learned. This is normal. Progress comes from consistent application over time, not from perfection. Track your growth by noticing how you handle similar situations differently over time. You might not see day-to-day improvements, but comparing how you respond to criticism now versus 6 months ago, or how you handle stress now versus a year ago, will reveal significant growth. The key is making emotional freedom a way of life rather than just a technique. When detachment becomes your default mode, it supports you automatically through whatever life presents. Chapter 15, Your New Life Begins Now. You now have something most people never develop: the knowledge and tools to live free from emotional tyranny while keeping your heart fully alive. You understand how to observe emotions without being controlled by them, how to detach from outcomes without losing motivation, how to maintain your center regardless of external chaos, how to respond from wisdom rather than reactivity. But here's the truth. Knowledge becomes transformation only through consistent application. The difference between people who remain trapped and those who become free isn't in what they know. It's in what they practice. Your new life begins the moment you commit to implementing these principles, regardless of how you feel about doing so. The first thing you'll notice is how much energy you've been wasting. All those hours spent worrying about the uncontrollable. All that mental space consumed by other people's opinions. All that emotional energy drained by taking things personally. This energy becomes available for creative, productive purposes. Your relationships will transform. Some people will be drawn to your new stability. They'll appreciate your ability to remain calm during difficulties and your capacity to love without neediness. These relationships will deepen because they're based on genuine connection rather than emotional dependency. Other relationships may become strained. People who were used to controlling you through drama may resist your new boundaries. Those who relied on you to absorb their chaos may be uncomfortable with your refusal to carry their burdens. Some may accuse you of being cold when you stop reacting to their triggers. This relationship sorting is healthy, even when painful. As you develop emotional freedom, you naturally attract people who appreciate authenticity and growth. You release relationships based on drama and codependence. Your decision-making will become dramatically more effective. You'll choose based on values and long-term benefit rather than temporary feelings. You'll take calculated risks instead of avoiding opportunities because they feel scary. You'll end situations that don't serve you instead of staying trapped because change feels uncomfortable. Your health will likely improve as you eliminate chronic stress from emotional reactivity. Your nervous system can finally relax. You'll sleep better, have more energy, and feel more vitality. You'll discover you can maintain your values even when they're unpopular because your well-being doesn't depend on others' approval. You can do what you believe is right regardless of criticism. This integrity becomes a source of deep self-respect. Your work will improve as you become less affected by politics, criticism, and pressure. You'll make better professional decisions, communicate more effectively, and handle feedback constructively because your self-worth isn't threatened by suggestions for improvement. Perhaps most importantly, you'll discover an inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You'll stop waiting for life to be perfect before allowing yourself to be happy. You'll appreciate what you have while working toward what you want. This peace isn't passive. It's an active state of engagement that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life presents. You'll feel more alive because you're no longer dulled by constant reactivity. The transformation you experience will inspire others. Even if you never speak about these principles directly, your example of calm strength will give others permission to develop their own freedom. You'll become living proof that it's possible to care deeply while remaining detached, to love fully while maintaining independence, to engage completely while staying centered. This isn't the end of your journey, it's the beginning of a new way of living that will deepen throughout your life. Every situation becomes a chance to practice mastery. Every relationship becomes an opportunity to embody wisdom. Your new life of emotional freedom is yours to create, moment by moment. Each time you observe emotions without being controlled by them, each time you respond from wisdom rather than reactivity, each time you maintain your center during chaos, you're building this new life. The power has always been yours. Now you know how to use it. The world needs people who embody this mastery. In a society driven by reactivity and drama, your example of centered wisdom becomes a gift. You become a source of stability in chaos, clarity in confusion, peace in conflict. Your journey of emotional freedom without losing your heart is complete when you realize it never ends. It's a continuous practice of choosing freedom over reactivity, wisdom over emotion, love over attachment. Every day offers new opportunities to deepen this mastery. Every relationship provides chances to practice these principles. The life of emotional freedom you've learned to create is yours to live fully, starting right now. This is your invitation, your permission, your power. Step into it, live it, become it. Your emotionally free life begins now.